My grandpa loved westerns. There was always an episode of Gunsmoke or Bonanza on somewhere in the house. And by association, I love westerns too. I love the gritty, dark revenge tales where the morally ambiguous main character is wronged and he seeks vengeance for all of the wrongs committed against him. While he shared his love of westerns through John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, I shared my love of them through Red Harlow and Colton White. Back in 2022, I took a fresh look at Red Harlow's story, the original Red Dead Revolver. I ultimately decided that Red Dead Revolver is a classic, even if it doesn't have much in common with Rockstar's later Red Dead Redemption games. But today isn't about Red Dead. Today I decided that I would finally give Colton White his turn on the channel, with Activision and Neversoft's Gun. Today I plan on checking out not only the big mainline console release, but also the PSP port, which, believe it or not, has some exclusive content. You're not going to want to miss this. It's crazy. It blew my mind. Enough stalling. Let's just dive into it. My name is Mercy, and I played Gun. Enjoy. Gun was released on November 8th, 2005 for PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and PC. It was later released for Xbox 360 on November 22nd, 2005, and on PSP on October 10th, 2006. I'll be showing footage today from the Xbox 360 and PSP versions of the game. I want to start with the story and get into all of the tech specs later. The story follows Cole White, a gunslinger looking to seek revenge on the people responsible for his father's murder. So when the first mission begins, you're hunting with your father, Ned. You're hunting different animals like geese and wolves, when suddenly a huge grizzly bear knocks Ned off of his feet. Unable to fight, you grab his rifle and start blasting away at the grizzly. Both of you barely escape the fight, but you escape just in time as a riverboat is passing by. These riverboats are what they usually board to sell their pelts and earn their keep, but this is about to be anything but an ordinary trip for them. Cole speaks to a preacher named Jeremiah Reed, who Cole is a bit suspicious of. While this is happening, Ned is off in a room to the side talking to a woman about a safe that's on board. Problem is, Reed is in fact crooked and he's after whatever's inside that safe. So he throws an axe into the back of the woman's head that Ned was talking to and orders an attack on the riverboat. So you fight through the ship a bit and eventually you're cornered. Ned, in an effort to save Cole's life, pushes him overboard, but not before he reveals that he's not actually Cole's father. Yeah, that's a pretty wild thing to say before you die, but he also tells Cole to find a woman named Jenny in Dodge City for more information. Shortly after all of this, the ship explodes, killing everyone on board. Cole survives the encounter and later meets up with Jenny in Dodge City, who informs him that Reed came from another city, Empire City, and that the mayor of Empire City, Hoodoo Brown, knows where he is. I want to skip ahead a little because I don't want to spoil everything and get too caught up on the story, but it's later revealed that Hoodoo Brown, Jeremiah Reed, and various others are all working together for a man named Thomas Magruder. In simple terms, he's basically the big bad boss of the Wild West. He's a railroad tycoon, expanding the railroads through native lands. He has a vast network and web of allies, so he's not exactly an easy guy to get a hold of. We eventually learn that his end goal is to find the lost city of gold. He's looking to enrich himself by pretty much any means necessary. Nothing is off the table for this guy, including enslavement and murder, so yeah, he's not a nice guy. So throughout the game, you're not only seeking revenge, but trying to uncover the mystery of who your real father is, what role your adopted father Ned plays in all of this, and trying to figure out why Magruder and his people wanted whatever was in that safe so badly. It's actually a really interesting and well put together story. I've beaten this game probably 10 times now and I know all of the major story beats, but I still find it engaging. I think part of what makes the game so engaging for me is just how cinematic it is. Its presentation is top notch for the time. Every cutscene is fully voice acted with an incredible cast of Hollywood actors. Cole is voiced by Thomas Jane, who previously voiced the Punisher in the Punisher game, as well as playing him in the 2004 Punisher movie. I think his gruff voice fits the character well. Cole is this very gritty, grounded type of guy. He's a man on a mission. He's not someone to joke around too much. He's not gonna spit a random one-liner out. Other prominent voice actors here are Ron Perlman, who voices Hoodoo Brown, the crooked mayor of Empire City. Brad Dourif, who most notably voices Chucky from Child's Play, voices Jeremiah Reed, the crooked preacher we met earlier on the riverboat. And finally, Lance Henriksen voices the main antagonist Thomas Magruder, who previously played Bishop in Alien and later voiced General Shepard in the original Modern Warfare 2. There are so many more here I could list off, but I don't want to get too caught up on this. The point being that the cast is stacked. On top of this, the soundtrack for this game is absolutely incredible. I find myself just sitting on the menu at times to hear more of the theme. Here, take a listen real quick. It's big, it's epic, it instantly transports me into Gun's Wild West setting. Nowadays, we don't think too much about cinematics or film scores in video games. They're commonplace and, to be honest, I think they're even expected, at least in the AAA space. But back then, this was the era where the line between video games and movies started to blur, and there's no better example of this to me than Gun. I think it's helped Gun age really well in that regard, but even with that blurred line, we all know that games aren't movies. Cinematics and scores and voice acting can't carry a game, so how is the gameplay of Gun? Well, I'm happy to say that it's pretty damn good. Let me explain. So, at the start of the game, you're given a basic revolver and a basic repeater. As you complete more missions, you're given better, more sophisticated weapons. Gun has repeater rifles, bolt-action rifles, shotguns, revolvers, a bow with various types of arrows, and throwables like dynamite and Molotov cocktails. I found the most useful weapons in the game to be the repeaters and the pistols. The repeaters because they have great range and they hold a ton of rounds before having to reload. The pistols are super useful mostly because they have unlimited ammo, and while they do have limited range, most of Gun's combat happens in that close to mid-range. I found the shotguns and scoped rifles to be very situational. Like, the shotguns were great for crowd control, say if I was fighting inside of a tightly packed building. I only ever used scoped rifles when the game required me to use it. Like, there's this mission in Dodge City where you're on a water tower sniping incoming bandits. If you let them get in too close, they'll hurt the person you're trying to defend, so really the only option is that scoped rifle. I just found that they took too long in between shots and you're essentially immobilized while using it. This should be a no-brainer in any game really, but in Gun, movement really is king to avoiding damage and dodging bullets. There's no cover system or anything like that, so you pretty much always have to be strafing. This is one of the parts of Gun I think modern gamers might be turned away from. It's not like you can put your gun down and sprint to a piece of cover like you can in Red Dead Redemption, for example. In Gun, there's no sprint or what I'm calling manual aiming. So what I mean by this is that as long as your gun is out of its holster, you're always aiming and ready to fire. It's not like you hold the left trigger or the right mouse button to aim. You're always in that aiming stance ready to fire. The game also doesn't snap you to targets. It has an aim assist for sure, but you'll have to manually dial in most of your shots. Gun does have a rage mode type system called Quick Draw where you whip out your handgun and by pressing left or right on the left stick, you'll snap to a target where you can fire on them with unlimited ammo and no reloads. This is a limited time thing. It's only available as long as you have meter, so it's not something that's available all the time. And you can't use it on any other weapon, so your range is also limited while using it. That's why I said earlier that I think strafing is so important to surviving in Gun. But sometimes you might choose not to strafe and instead just run right into the line of fire. Gun doesn't have regenerating health and instead you take a swig from your flask to heal. So maybe you have a lot of swigs left and so you figure it's easier to just walk in there like RoboCop, blasting whoever's in your way instead. Adding on to this, Gun has what I like to think of as two categories of upgrades. The first category I call character upgrades. These can only be upgraded by completing different missions and activities. These affect Cole and his horse, like your health, your horse's health and their stamina, melee damage, quick draw duration, and one skill called Gun Hand. Gun Hand sort of rolls a bunch of different stats into one category, including your reload time, shot range, damage bonuses, think like headshots, and the accuracy of your guns. The second category are more like equipment upgrades. They upgrade your weapons, like carrying more bullets or sticks of dynamite, increasing damage or range to a specific class of weapon, like repeaters, for example, or even horseshoes to make your horse run faster. Gun is sort of like an RPG, but instead of having traditional levels and an XP system like you'd expect, you're completing tasks to upgrade specific predetermined stats. So, diving into this a little further, main missions and side missions upgrade different stats depending on what you're doing. There's some overlap between some of them, sure, but main missions more so blanket upgrade your stats, whereas side missions tend to focus on one or two individual stats. Main missions in Gun are much longer than most of the side missions. They sort of play out like GTA missions, where you go to a person on the map, initiate the mission, and either ride to wherever you need to be, or all hell breaks loose where you're at and you're fighting off outlaws or American Indians or whoever. I really like how Gun is structured. Like I said earlier, you're working your way up to Magruder, so you'll do a mission or two focused on taking down a specific member of Magruder's crew, and then eventually you'll fight that member in a boss fight. Most of the boss fights are pretty brain dead, unfortunately, where you're just out strafing their attacks and trying to blast them when you can to tick away their health. The only boss in the entire game I really enjoyed was Magruder, funny enough. What I like about this boss fight is that there's actually more to the strategy than just strafing and hiding and biding your time waiting for an opening. In this fight, you make your own openings. See, there are a bunch of gas vents all over the floor, and when you shoot these with an explosive arrow or throw dynamite on them, they explode. So you have to sort of skirt Magruder until he's on one of these vents and then let loose. It can be tedious, but it's not too bad once you get the hang of it. He also has 2 phases where after his first phase, he'll jump up onto a ledge and chuck dynamite at you. I found that by going into quick draw, I could quickly snap to that dynamite and blow it up in midair, collapsing the ceiling on Magruder and finishing the fight. I wish more bosses in Gun were like this. Instead, you're kind of just mindlessly skirting around, tanking what damage you can, and unloading bullets into the boss. I found the Hollister fight extremely annoying. His gun is incredibly powerful, and he's relentless with his pursuit. If you get too far away from him, he'll start chucking dynamite at you as a way to get out of hiding. This would be so much worse if I hadn't upgraded my stats with side missions. And it's not like Gun barely has anything to do on the side, there's plenty. Sure, you can just plow through the game as if it's a linear one, but I found that the late game content becomes extremely difficult, even on normal, if you don't upgrade your stats at least a little bit outside of the main content. The main missions do upgrade your stats, but they're essentially the bare minimum. The missions are fun, don't get me wrong, I've loved coming back to this game again, but you have to be ready to play the side content as well to fill out Cole's stats. There are 8 different missions or activities for you to do outside of the main storyline. I say or activities because some of these are just so short I wouldn't call them missions. Let's just go down the list, starting with my favorite missions, bounty hunting. So yeah, you're a bounty hunter catching a criminal on a wanted poster. What I find interesting about this game is that I can bring in my targets dead or alive, and bringing them in alive pays out a little more. It's a cool mechanic and makes some of these missions more than just a bloodbath. Like, for example, if I was just trying to kill the target and his henchmen, I just run up in there and kill them as efficiently as possible. But since I'm aiming to take them alive, what if he's on horseback? What if he's on a mounted machine gun? What do I do then? I can't just snipe him off the gun. I have to methodically work my way up towards him until I'm close enough to stun him, grab him, and knock him out. It's fun, and I usually do all of these when I replay the game. It's nice when a game mixes things up and makes you think. Another one I enjoy is called Keep the Peace, where the sheriff of whatever town you're in tells you about different outlaws around town, and it's up to you to put a stop to them. They can be something like a hostage situation where you have to be really careful not to kill the hostages, or just clearing out an invading gang from town. They're quick and easy and upgrade your gun hand stats, so I'm not complaining. There are a few activities that don't upgrade your stats and instead just pay out money, like mining for example. Littered around Gun's open world are gold deposits that you're able to mine for a few bucks. Just make sure you buy the pickaxe from the shopkeeper in Dodge City or else you won't be able to mine. I think it's kind of strange how you don't have this from the get-go, but whatever, it's cheap. Another one I enjoy is Texas Hold'em Poker. Just beware, if you don't already know how to play poker, the game doesn't really give you a tutorial or teach you at all. It kind of just assumes you know how to play. One thing I do like about poker and Gun is how you can cheat. After your first hand, you keep one of the cards from that hand and you're able to swap it in and out of future hands. If you don't know, you're only supposed to have 2 cards in your hand normally. It makes the game a bit less tedious, and I found myself making bigger, riskier plays as a result. Now, not every side mission in Gun is good, and so I want to talk about the worst side missions of Gun. First off, I gotta get it out of the way because I'm gonna bottle it up if I don't. The Pony Express. Basically, the gist is you're on horseback and you're tasked with quickly riding from point A to point B, and sometimes back to point A or to a possible point C. So what's the issue exactly? Well, for me, there's a few, so bear with me here. But the core issue for me is that I just don't think they give you enough time, and it's not even like I'm missing the point by a lot of time. The timer is pretty much empty when I get off my horse and talk to the NPC. Oh yeah, that's another thing. You have to allocate time to actually dismount your horse and talk to the NPC. You can't just ride into the circle and it triggers the cutscene. I'm not afraid to admit this, but there was an embarrassingly high amount of times where I made it to the NPC in time, but then my dumbass blocked the NPC with my horse and I couldn't talk to him, which caused me to fail the mission. The mount horse button and talking to NPC button is of course the same button, so go figure, but like, okay fine, I failed the mission, let's just restart it and go again. But every time you restart a mission, you have to ride up to the NPC, dismount your horse, press the talk button, and listen to the NPC's dialogue again and again over and over. Thankfully, you can skip the dialogue, but it just gets so tedious after a while, you know? And the mission itself isn't exactly the most exciting thing in the game, just beating the shit out of your horse, pushing it to its absolute limits to reach some guy who's too fat to walk down the block and get his groceries. Yeah, that's a real mission, by the way. Yeah, so instead of being the hero of the Wild West and saving the town or arresting a criminal, you're a cowboy door dasher. I hope you're happy with yourself. The biggest sin these missions commit is just the lack of any meaningful progression. The only stat these missions improve on is your horse stat, which in my opinion is probably the least important stat in the game besides melee damage. You can easily get through the entire game game with both of these stats being fairly low, trust me. I always avoid the Pony Express on repeat playthroughs, and honestly, I'm a little bit mad I had to play them for this video. They're just not worth the headache. Another activity I'm not a huge fan of is hunting. Basically, the hunter tells you the general location of an animal he wants, and so you have to not only find it, but quietly kill it with an arrow. It's okay, I guess, just not something I typically do. It pays out money and ups your gun hand stat, but it's just so dang boring. Keeping with the theme of animals, there's also ranching, which is pretty much just herding various animals back into their pens. Pretty bland and something I'll rarely spend any serious amount of time on. The most exciting part of ranching is when the mission complete screen pops up. Neither of these two are as egregious as the Pony Express. God, I hate it. But that just about sums up Gun. On the Xbox 360, that is. I went into this video with the idea that I would show a few different videos comparing the Xbox 360, PS2, and PSP versions of the game. I thought, I'll have to beat this game once on 360 and then play a few missions on other platforms for comparison, and then that's all, let's wrap it up. And so that was the plan as I finished the game first on 360, played a little PS2, got some footage, and it was smooth sailing. But once I booted the PSP version of the game and played a few missions, I knew I had to dedicate an entire segment of this video to it. It absolutely shocked me. I was seeing some things that I had never seen before. So when first starting the game, I noticed that there was an option for multiplayer, as well as quick play and then story. I thought that was kind of odd as the original game doesn't have multiplayer of any kind. I guess that's why this version of Gun has the subtitle Showdown. So I decided to just jump into the story to start out. And so it played out how I expected it to for a while. You get attacked by the bear, board the ship, it blows up, you go to Dodge City and meet with Jenny. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. I was getting pretty much what I expected, a downgraded handheld version of the console game, which is super cool by the way. In 2006, this would have been mind-blowing to my 13-year-old self, but it's 100% a fact that this is a downgrade in every way. The first major one being the visuals, and before anyone says anything, these visuals were never meant to be blown up onto a big screen like this. I understand that, but the game is just so damn ugly. The cutscenes have all been pre-rendered from the console versions, then compressed so badly there's compression artifacts all over the screen. I promise you what you're seeing here isn't YouTube compression, it's just the game. And it's not just the video that's compressed, the audio is as well, with some audio lines being so muffled it's easy to mishear them. But putting all of that aside, my single biggest issue with the PSP version is its frame rate. I don't have a frame counter or any hard evidence that this is running at 15 FPS, but this visually to me looks like 15 FPS. It's very jittery, robotic, and stiff, especially when turning the camera. Oh yeah, turning the camera in and of itself is an exercise in patience. Since the PSP lacks a second analog stick, you use the face buttons circle, square, triangle, and cross to turn the camera. Alternatively, you can swap the controls to where the analog stick moves the camera and the face buttons move the character, but I couldn't adjust. The left hand controls movement, the right hand controls aiming. I don't make the rules. Point being, since you're using those face buttons for camera controls, you're unable to use them for melee attacks, reloads, jumps, switching weapons, anything. So now you have to hold a button, usually down or left on the D-pad, and then press a face button to perform an action. It's something I never really quite got used to. I guess I just have the Xbox 360 control scheme burned into my brain. It's not even like the control scheme on the 360 is good or anything. You click on the left stick to reload, for God's sake, but it's anything but modern. But it feels more intuitive to me than having to stop in place, hold down a button, and then press another to perform a basic action like a reload or a weapon switch. But ultimately the game still functions and is totally playable. It's not a broken port. But like I was saying, the game seemed totally normal outside of this for a while. I was doing a few of the side missions in Dodge City, just feeling out the controls and everything, when I eventually decided to continue the story in Empire City. So I did the first mission where you escort Jenny in the stagecoach from Dodge to Empire, and then I noticed instead of directly talking to the Mayor Hoodoo like in the main game, I was greeted with a guy sitting on Hoodoo's front stairs named Poncho, and I thought to myself, I don't remember a Poncho in Gun. So I walked up to him and he said this:
"Hey gringo, you looking for Hoodoo? He busy upstairs. Ain't got time for nobodies like you. I can put in a good word for you though, if you do a little favor for me."
What? I can't talk to Hoodoo yet because I'm a nobody? Didn't I just protect Jenny in the stagecoach? Didn't Hoodoo just praise Cole when Jenny introduced us to each other like 10 seconds before this? In the original game, Hoodoo's deputies took me up to him as soon as I arrived in Empire. I was instantly deputized and sent on my way to the next story mission. In this, I have to prove myself once again and complete 4 missions for Poncho first. Okay, fine. Let's talk about these missions. The first mission has you laying an ambush for the Miller gang, throwing explosive barrels into the road and blowing them up as they run by. This mission is legit just the first Federal Marshal side mission from the main game. So then I played the next one and you're tasked with escorting an opium dealer to the jail as his posse comes to attack you in waves. Again, this is just another Federal Marshal mission from the main game. So at this point I'm thinking, okay, whatever. They just made the Federal Marshal missions required instead of as optional side content. That's fair, fine, whatever. But just when I thought I had this figured out, they mixed it up. Poncho's third mission has you attacking the Kragan gang, which as far as I know isn't mentioned anywhere in the original game. I can't find any information about this mission online outside of a few Let's Plays here on YouTube. So you ride out to their hideout and blast your way through Kragan's minions. Once you make it to the top of the hideout, you meet the man himself, Kragan. He's a man in an apron wearing what looks like an old school welder's mask, so you can only see his eyes in the tiny slit in the mask. You can't damage Kragan through conventional firearms whatsoever, so your only option is to blow him up with dynamite. He'll chuck dynamite in your direction if you stand around too long, so just make sure you're on the move. The only real threat I faced in this fight was an occasional henchman of his coming out to shoot me. Once I found a spot to stand to chuck dynamite up at him, it was smooth sailing. He wasn't able to damage me whatsoever, and he didn't attempt to escape from his little hut. He just stood there and let me blow him up. So, definitely one of the most underwhelming boss fights in the entire game, to be honest, and that's really saying something with this game where the boss fights really are nothing special. So I go back and there's one more mission for Poncho, and it's another one that's pretty underwhelming as well. You find a moonshiner, drag him to the jail, slap the absolute soul out of him, which is the highlight of this mission by the way, and then when he talks and tells you where the stills are, you're out and about riding around destroying them all. After this, Poncho graciously allows you to talk to Hoodoo and the story continues on as it should. Now to be clear, I don't mind them adding extra content. Honestly, I think that's really cool. You're basically getting the old school equivalent of a modern day expansion or an update, but god, I just wish it was optional. I just think that these sort of missions and characters ruin the pacing of the gameplay and the tone of the story. And unfortunately, Poncho isn't the only character like this in Gun Showdown. Later on, just after you break Clay, the leader of the resistance against Magruder out of jail, you're greeted by someone named Barton. Barton is another Poncho and claims that Clay is out of the camp running some errands. Really? He's out running some errands just after I broke him out of prison? Where he's enemy number 1 to Hoodoo, where he was being tortured and claimed he couldn't hold a gun? These are the sort of things I'm talking about when it comes to ruining the tone. These characters contradict things that we're seeing and hearing with our own eyes and ears. And here's the thing, I think it'd be pretty cool to run some side missions with the resistance fighters. You know, robbing stores or stealing horses or anything to disrupt Hoodoo's cash flow and influence. But these are unfortunately required, and I think it just ends up bogging the game down. Gun is already a game that's paced well in my book, and these changes just come off as unnecessary padding. New missions aren't the only addition to Gun's story mode. They've also added 2 weapons, throwing knives and mines. Throwing knives function like the other throwables in Gun, where you have to charge up the throw by holding the button and then letting go to actually throw it. Unfortunately, I didn't find much use for them. I honestly found them kind of difficult to use. I'd rather just blast my enemies with a gun or shoot an arrow at them if I'm trying to be silent. The mines function just about how you'd expect them to. You toss them on the ground and wait for someone to either walk across them or you can shoot them. I kind of forgot I even had these in my inventory beyond the one mission where they're introduced. In the main game, if you're trying to lay a trap, the game supplies you with explosive red barrels to set up. So these mines kind of feel like a strange addition to me. It's almost like they added the mines first and then they kind of had to come up with some missions to actually use them in. So that just about wraps up the story additions. There are more, but what about those other menu options? Quick play and multiplayer. Let's start first with quick play. Quick play is broken down into 2 categories, challenges and poker. Poker is basically what you think. It's just poker from the main game, nothing special or too crazy about it. The challenges, however, are a variety of different scenarios where you're having to kill a certain number of animals in 5 minutes, or defend a position in 5 minutes, burn every building in Empire in 5 minutes. or just survive for 5 minutes. These are really nothing special, they're pretty bland, and I didn't see any reason to ever go back to them. The only one I found to be a bit fascinating was the one where you're defending town square from outlaws. They come in waves, but what makes this one interesting is that simply killing them scores you 1 point. However, grabbing and arresting them nabs you 10 points. So there's a bit of strategy there in how you want to chase the high score. Remember, if you have an outlaw grabbed, you're vulnerable to gunfire, so arresting outlaws when there's many more around you isn't so smart. This is the only one I found real strategy in, and one that made me think about what I was doing. And so, finally, let's talk about the multiplayer portion of Gun Showdown. Gun Showdown's multiplayer has a few maps to play on, with a few characters from the story mode and 3 modes to play with up to 7 of your friends. Poker is, well, it's poker, but there's also Deathmatch and a mode called Golden Cross. Deathmatch is pretty much what you'd expect. It's a free-for-all with weapons scattered around the map to pick up. Once you hit the score limit, the round is over. I was able to showcase this one with bots, but it just feels so clunky and stiff. The bots move in a very unnatural, erratic way and make this more difficult than it needs to be, especially with those camera controls I mentioned earlier. The final mode, Golden Cross, I unfortunately can't show off properly since I can't enable bots, but the premise is simple. You grab the cross and hold it for as long as possible. As you hold the cross, your score ticks up and whoever hits the score limit wins. I can imagine having some fun with this back in the day if I had 7 friends who were also into gun as much as I was. Yeah, I didn't. So, unfortunately, the game doesn't have online multiplayer of any kind, so you're shit out of luck if you didn't have friends who were into gun. And even if you did, would you really play this all that often? I doubt it. I just can't imagine us sinking any significant amount of time into it. It's just too bare bones with not enough to do. And that just about sums up the PSP version of Gun Showdown. I think it's really cool that they were able to port this pretty big open world game to a handheld all the way back in 2006. All of the main missions and cutscenes are here from the original game, and it's a totally valid way to play the game. But looking at it today, especially when put up against its home console brothers, it's the weakest of the bunch. Even with all of the added content, this is the least desirable version of the game. That being said, I would love to see this extra content brought over to the PC version at some point. Not because it's good or anything, far from it, but for game's preservation's sake. I've been reading wikis and I've watched a few other gun videos, and none of them brought up the exclusive content other than them glazing over it and saying it had multiplayer and new side missions. I didn't know the extent of the additional content, and I'm glad to say that I've played it now. And that just about sums up everything I have to say about Gun. Gun is just this excellent western, a time capsule from an era where games were just starting to become more cinematic, where the line between films and games started to blur. Gun, for all of its shortcomings, is still one of the best westerns of all time. To me, it stands alongside the Red Dead series proudly, and in some ways is more like Red Dead Redemption than even Red Dead Revolver is. What's most important though, is that Gun was a great game in 2005, and it's still a great game 19 years later and counting. My question for you all today is this: what is your experience with Gun? Did you get it on release? What platform did you play it on? Tell me about your story. I would love to read your comments. Thank you all for watching. My name is Mercy, and as always, have a good one.